Good morning everybody and welcome back to another War Thunder video. I thought I was going to have to do a review for the new the new captured T-62 Premium in the Chinese tech tree, which I've been using to grind out a lot of the tanks in that tier, or at least to start to grind out anyway. I'm just getting into tier 4 now. I thought I was going to have to do a review of this tank, but as we should probably have guessed anyway, it is literally just a T-62 with the number 545 on the side of the turret. With this in mind, I thought it might be a good idea to actually go over the history of this tank. So, I'm assuming a lot of people probably think that everybody in a communist country likes all the other communist countries for whatever reason. For those of you who are not particularly in touch with Eastern European history or communism or politics in general, it might come as a bit of a surprise to you to discover that this is actually not the case. A lot of the communist countries hate one another, even though they all have, in theory, the same political ideals. The actual way that they put those into effect is completely different, and because of this, it draws divides between them. One of the biggest divides amongst all communist countries, and to an extent still exists to this day, is China and the Soviet Union. Obviously, for those of you who are familiar with your history, the Soviet Union long since collapsed. It was officially dissolved on Christmas Day of 1991, if my memory serves me correctly. Although China technically still is a communist country, even though nowadays they're more into the free market and all that sort of shit. They are, at least in theory, still a communist country. Anyway, enough of the background, let's get into the story of the T-62. Now, this is going to be quite a long one, possibly. The story that I'm going to be reading you is actually off of a War History Online article. So it's not my own words, although, for those of you who aren't aware, I actually am an admin on the Tanks Being Tanks page on Facebook, one of the largest pages to do with armour on Facebook, and I also run my own page, Soviet Armour, which is how they found me, actually. And there was an article on Tanks Being Tanks regarding this particular tank itself and the history behind it. So if you want to know a little bit more about that, go and look the post up. It was posted on the 7th of September. Anyway, let's crack on. In 1900, Russia signed the Treaty of Beijing, which gave them Outer Manchuria and other Chinese lands. When both countries became communist, the nagging border dispute was swept under the rug, especially since China needed Russian technological expertise. At least until Nikita Khrushchev ruined it. In February of 1956, he hosted the 20th Congress of the Communist Party and denounced Joseph Stalin as a monster, demanding reforms. Mao Zedong, China's head honcho, was shocked. He thought of Stalin as a comrade in arms. Worse, he believed that Khrushchev was also attacking him, for Mao felt that purges and summary executions were necessary for China's transition from its feudal past. Then, in 1958, Khrushchev wanted to install long-wave radio stations along China's coast to help guide Soviet submarines. Mao was suspicious but agreed on the condition that China be given nuclear weapons. Khrushchev balked, even though Chinese scientists had already received blueprints for an atomic bomb from their Russian counterparts. When Khrushchev visited the US in 1959, Mao accused him of sucking up to capitalists. Things came to a head in 1962 when China used the Cuba Missile Crisis as an opportunity to occupy India's Aksai Chin region, and the USSR sided with India. But when Khrushchev pulled Soviet missiles out of Cuba, Mao had enough, and the official friendship between the two nations ended. In 1964, Mao claimed that the Treaty of Beijing had been unfair. He demanded a return of territories under Soviet control, including Zhenbao, or Treasure Island, which the Russians called Damansky. To mitigate increasing tensions, Khrushchev agreed to head over Zhenbao and other islands, but Mao screwed it up a few months later. During a speech, he jokingly said that he'd present Russia with a bill for their occupation of Siberia, the Far East, and Kamchatka. Khrushchev was furious, so he nullified his agreement with Mao. Chinese and Soviet troops began massing on the disputed border. Though technologically inferior to Russia, Mao was convinced that China's superior numbers would far outweigh Russian technology, and he was right. When Arkady Nikolaevich Zhenchevko, former Under-Secretary General of the UN, defected to the US in 1978, he admitted that the USSR was terrified of China's numbers. Savchenko claimed that if Mao attacked, the Kremlin was going to launch nuclear missiles. But Nikolai Vantsevich Ogalarov, Marshal of the Soviet Union, cautioned against it. He knew they couldn't nuke China without consequences to themselves, but while the Soviets thought of self-preservation, Mao did not. Mao just couldn't grasp how dangerous nuclear weapons really were, calling them America's paper tigers. He was convinced that China's vast size and numbers protected it from any possibility of nuclear annihilation. Still, he took no chances, so on October 16, 1964, China detonated its first atomic bomb in their test area. Things only got worse from there. According to the official Chinese version, some of their civilians were attacked by Soviet troops in border regions. Others who peacefully protested illegal Soviet occupation were allegedly run over by Soviet tanks. The Soviets claimed that Chinese soldiers began haranguing Soviet border guard post. Some by waving Mao's red book at their faces to de-escalate tensions. Soviet border guards were ordered to use sticks to push Chinese nationals back across the border. The Chinese retaliated by using longer sticks, resulting in ridiculous jousts. Later, they sent martial artists and wrestlers to the border, since neither side wanted outright war nor to lose face. It all came to a head on March 2, 1969. In supposed revenge of murdered Chinese civilians, members of the People's Liberation Army attacked Soviet border guards on Zhenbao Island, killing 59 and injuring 94. The Soviets counterattacked on March 15th by shelling the PLA on the Chinese side of the Ussuri River. To take Zhenbao back, they sent in 4 of their newest weapons, the still top-secret T-62 tanks. As they crossed the narrow frozen river, one ran over a landmine. The other 3 didn't bother turning. They simply reversed back to the Soviet side. A PLA soldier approached the damaged tank, opened the hatch, and found himself staring at the barrel of a pistol held by an injured Russian. The man fired, but his gun jammed, allowing the Chinese soldier to throw a grenade in. The Chinese wanted to tow the tank away, but sniper fire from the Soviet side prevented that. The following day, the Soviets returned to claim their dead, which the Chinese allowed. But when they tried to retrieve their tank, the Chinese fired, forcing them to retreat. On March 21st, the Soviets sent over a demolition team, but were again beaten back by the Chinese. With the Soviets gone, the Chinese Navy was called in to help pull the tank onto the Chinese side. They arrived on March the 28th, but were shelled, so the Chinese tried another tactic. Using the tank and sniper fire as cover, engineers began dismantling the T-62. They were still at it on April the 2nd when the ice began to melt. The Soviets took advantage of this by firing at the ice around the tank until it sank. Satisfied, they retreated. They ignored the Chinese Navy, who continued their efforts to salvage the tank, but whose suits were ill-equipped for the freezing temperatures, causing many to die of hypothermia. By April the 29th, the Chinese pulled the rest and sent it out to the factory in Lichuan. But the Soviets hadn't given up on their tank. In mid-May, a Chinese saboteur was caught near the factory with a bag full of explosives. Under questioning, he admitted to working for the Soviets, who wanted him to destroy the factory and the T-62. He was executed. The tank didn't turn the balance of power in China's favour, but it accomplished something far more important. Mao realised that he couldn't fight the capitalist West and the Soviets at the same time, which led to a thaw in Chinese-US relations. Only in 1991 was Zhenbao Island returned to China, but it was only in 2003 that the two nations finally delineated their borders. So, there you go. It's a very interesting story. Like I said, for those of you who aren't particularly familiar with communist ideology or the history between the different communist nations, it is certainly quite an interesting topic to talk about. I hope you enjoyed it. So let's just quickly go over how the tank actually functions in-game. It's literally a T-62 from the Soviet main tech tree with the number 545 on the side of the turret. There is absolutely nothing different with this tank whatsoever, apart from the premium bonuses that you get for it being a premium vehicle. So, in terms of how you play it in-game, I try to use it, as you've probably seen in the gameplay footage in the background, I try to use it as a long-distance sniper. I don't try to get involved too much, if I can possibly help it, in tank scraps until the end of the battle, purely because of the long reload on the gun. The gun itself and the shells that it fires are quite good. The armour is meh at this battle rating. Although, like I said, if you use it as a sniper at long range engagements, it does a lot better, and it compensates for the long reload of the gun. Although the gun is very accurate at range, so it kind of plays into this very well. I hope you all enjoyed the video. Thank you very much for watching. Please feel free to subscribe if you want to see more, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Cheers.